Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The Revelation of Jesus Christ, the Faithful Witness. Today we'll be talking about lesson 18 of our study, which covers the book of Revelation, chapter 17. For some time leading up to this lesson, we have been building to a point that is the conclusion of this Feast of Pentecost in the book of Revelation. This is not that. This is, as we have seen so many times from the transition from 6 to 7, from 6 to 7, a pause as we wait to get to, we're on day 49, right? We've got our 7 sevens, and now, as we had when we were opening seals, between the 6th and the 7th seal, a long pause. Here we have an especially long pause from day 49 to day 50. So this is not that payoff yet. This is on the way to that payoff. And as we're doing so, we introduce a bit of a new character. One that is predictable from things we have seen and important to get to before we conclude the narrative, but a little odd to throw in at the end. But remember, we're kind of going over throughout the book of Revelation, we've been kind of going over the same period of time, all of it, from the point of view of different characters or aspects of reality. And this is another one, and an important one. We talked about Jesus a lot, not really directly from his point of view, but a lot. We talked about the dragon and the beast as sort of an anti-Trinity, and kind of an anti-Holy Spirit, and we compared and contrasted and opposed their works. Great, that all made sense, but in that same period of time, right in the middle of the book of Revelation, we also had an image of the woman and in the wilderness and the church, and all of the things that image represents, and we really didn't have an evil counterpart to that, which, if you think about it, we probably should have, and here we do. So this is anti-church, or the church of the world, or of the beast. And it has its own rites, its own sacraments. They're certainly not ours, nor do they work in any capacity. They are, as all of this is, they're an unreal perversion of a real and powerful thing. Which we'll also talk about, because this lesson highlights an interesting thing about the unreal nature of some of this that is interesting to get into. Beyond that, this lesson does a thing we haven't done for some time in the book of Revelation, where you see just a short little paragraph of an image at the beginning that John has, and then we're back to explanation in the text of, okay, here's what this is, and then here's what it means, because there's no way you're getting it from what the image is, and honestly, there's very good chance you're not getting it from the explanation either. This is not a simple one, and there are some reasons for that. A lot has been said about it this is one of the places where people try the most to anchor the book of Revelation to specific events in human history. And there are some things in it that really strongly recommend some degree of doing so. But by way of introduction, as we're here, I urge us not to get caught in the trap of doing that too much, right? For everything we've talked about in Revelation leading up to now, the point has been that's a bad idea. because we're dealing with prophecy that is multifaceted and manifests in many different ways across the course of history. This is going to be correct in that regard and to that extent. That general principle still holds, and this still projects truths about reality that are knowable via the lens of prophecy, and that still very much hold and are very much true. Where it starts to look like it's overlapping with human history, it gets a little less right, or a little, it's not wrong per se, but it's view and scope of history and how things seem to interpret look a little bit limited, and like they're coming from the point of view of John the author, which of course is how we personally experience and interpret what prophecy is, right? It's this abstract, pure thing that manifests across the ages in different ways, and we encounter it on a personal level, and it manifests through us as people into the world in different points in time and in different ways. And it works relationally to manifest into reality. It's a thing about how it works that is powerful and profound. But John is doing that here, right? Like, he's seeing this vision of prophecy, and he is imposing it upon his human view of history, which is not wrong, but it's also limited in sight and scope, and it's not what he's been doing the rest of the time, right? He's been, in the rest of the book, he's been leading us to this purer, more abstract view of prophecy, and doing so brilliantly, and making an unbelievably profound point all along the way as he does it. And here, as he's explaining his own image, he seems to go backwards from that just a little bit. And in so doing, he is a little less right than he is in a lot of the rest of the stuff. He's right within his view of the world, again, but not right within things he has no way of knowing, right? Like the broader scope of history in the world that he lives in and the future that hasn't yet happened. As we get into that, we will talk about our own experiences of prophecy and use it as an example for all of us for how we should and shouldn't go about applying and delving into some of these things. And we'll talk about the history side, because it's impossible to talk about all of the section without it, because there's been so much said, and some of it does seem to be really clear allusions to specific events in history. But the takeaway here should not be this talks about a specific point in history. The takeaway has to be what we've been talking about in the rest of the book. This broader view of what these realities about God and evil mean abstractly for the world, and then how we can, by understanding that, apply them to our lives and our realities, and better understand what the future holds, not specifically, but generally and abstractly, and where we as the people of God are going. So that is primarily what we'll focus on, but we'll have to talk about some of the history stuff. And the key area of focus here is this idea of the Church of Evil, and its liturgy and its sacraments, and its working in the world. And so that's our big theme, and we will focus more on that side of it. So the first part of this chapter, verses 1 through 6, lay out this image, and then the second part of it explains it, which puts us in an interesting spot as we try to study it, because maybe it is not prudent to go deeply into trying to understand what the image means the first time, and to wait for the text to make its second pass and to also try to explain it. So here, as we go through the first 6 verses, I want to make sure that we understand what this image actually is and a few of the parts. We'll dig a lot deeper into it on the back half here, along with John, because I think otherwise we'll just be anticipating things we're going to read in the text in a little bit, and that'll get very redundant. So we've got our 7 angels with their 7 bowls. So by way of transition, one of them comes to John and says, I will show you something. For all of the rest of this, it's important, there's a key word here that's important to remember, and that is the word judgment. We are here to see, not to see the harlot, but to see the judgment of the harlot. We don't get to a lot of judgment here. So this is, again, a thing that's going to span multiple lessons. We're introducing the harlot here, but the outcome and why this is being shown to us is predetermined, and it's one of judgment. And that ties this into the greater narrative of what's going on here on day 49. As we're winding things down, this is one of the things that has to be judged as we are doing that. It's a thing that has to more or less cease, as we'll eventually see. So that's the broader context of why we're talking about this, is that wrath and that judgment that we talked so much about in the previous lesson. So that's the why of this. So then the what. We've got a great harlot seated upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the dwellers of the earth have become drunk. So you've got a very promiscuous lady on waters, cavorting with the kings of the earth, and making them in some capacity drunk on her wine to some extent. So woman, waters, fornication, some kind of wine, inebriating specifically the kings of the earth are the key things that we have here, and the elements so far that we need to unpack. Lest any of this be too simple, we then are carried away into the wilderness, and we see a different woman. We see a woman in the wilderness. We've seen one of those in this book before, who was Mary in the church. This one isn't that. She's sitting on a beast, which is full of blasphemous names, and has heads and horns, as the beasts we've talked about do. So this woman is, whereas the other one was fleeing from the dragon and wanted nothing to do with it, and the dragon was trying to destroy her. This one is just happily riding along on it. So the relationship is not so contentious here, right? This is collaborative and not the opposite of that, adversarial. So it's not the same woman, right? But it's a woman out in the wilderness. It's very deliberately portrayed like the other woman, but whereas the other woman was friends with and got along with God and the angels and the Lamb, this one is on Team Beast. And by now you surely know, images in the book of Revelation you can have two different things back to back that are the same thing, right? You can have a woman who's a harlot who's sitting on the waters, and you can have a woman in the wilderness sitting on a beast, and that can be one woman, right? Especially when you previously had a woman clothed with the sun sitting in the moon and the stars and all of that, and then you had a woman in the wilderness, and those were the same one, right? Like, this is that sort of thing, right? Like, the first woman was enthroned in heaven, and the second woman is enthroned on earth, on the waters. So both have their royal depiction, and then both have their sort of in the wilderness depiction, and in each case it's the same woman. Even though, like, here it's like, oh, I saw a woman and then I went somewhere else and I saw a woman, great, but it's the same one. I think by this point in Revelation that probably isn't too disorienting, but at this point it's worth commenting on because it still can be very disorienting to be jumping around from this thing and that thing, and they're looking at the same thing different ways. But that is what prophecy does, right? It's one central truth and different perspectives on the one thing. So far so good. We've got two women who are probably one woman sitting. First version, she is sitting on the waters, cavorting with kings, and there's wine and they're getting drunk. And then you have in the wilderness a woman essentially riding on the beast, very clearly like the beasts. Here, those images, those women come together a little more clearly, right? Here now, the woman riding on the beast is clothed in purple and scarlet, adorned with, she's royal, right? And she's got her golden cup full of abominations and impurities of her fornication. Remember, the first woman was the one fornicating, so we're clearly back to one woman. We add that the thing upon which these kings are becoming inebriated is not alcohol so much as abominations, and it's evil, right? It's not, although I suppose any form of excess consumption of alcohol is a good image for that. It is not just getting loaded, it is evil. And here we have a sacramental-ish thing. Again, perversion, but we've seen previously very important things written on people's foreheads, signed or sealed onto people's foreheads, marking them out as belonging to especially God's church. And here we have the opposite of God's church. We have a church of the beast, and so this one is sealed, marked as belonging to that church. Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of earth's abominations. They must have written really small. But of course, it's not literal, right? That's the identity of what this woman is. So we've got to unpack that a little bit, because Babylon didn't matter at this point in world history, right? And nobody thought it was going to matter again, and it didn't. It was a while ago that Babylon mattered. And you had Greece and Macedon and Persia after Babylon and before Rome, who currently mattered at the time this was being written, and who doesn't matter now. So it's not because of Babylon's role in the current state of world history that it matters. It's because of Babylon's role in the history of the people of God. They were involved in helping to execute God's punishment on the disobedient among his people, when they routinely said, you know, God, we know you'd like us to, worship and serve you and be a blessing to all nations, but, we have something else in mind, right? They did get drunk on the perversions of not following God and the power of, we're doing all right in the world ourselves, and power and influence corrupted them, right? The people had their own kingdom and had a decent amount of power and authority and wealth carved out in their sphere in the world, and were actually players, sort of, for a period of time. And it went to their heads, and they thought they were something, and they thought they were somebody, and they thought they didn't need God. And they very quickly started intermingling with religious practices of other parts of the world, and they abandoned the dedication to God that was meant to be their identity as people. And in so doing, Babylon came in and made them not a country anymore, right? Like, Babylon was God's, like, this is over, right? Like, you all will never be an independent, self-ruling entity again as the people of God, because it doesn't work. Done. And it was via Babylon that God carried out that wrath against his people. It was also sort of a corrective force, but they're not going to see it mostly that way, right? In history, Babylon is the great enemy of the people of God, even if they were executing God's just judgment against his people. They're not looked upon fondly, right? And they're seen as a great enemy of God's people as a result of what they did. And so Babylon the Great is about as far from the people of God as you can get. And then mother of harlots and earth's abominations, right? Like, this is someone who, in relationship with the beast, and we've talked so much about the beast as that arm of the devil working on the earth through power, politics, money, these things that so greatly corrupt. This is the church of those things, right? That is built up around worship of those things. I skipped over it, but it needs comment. A name of mystery is the thing that is written. We talked previously about this idea of mystery, but it's worth re-emphasizing here. The Greek word mysterion does not mean what Scooby-Doo and the gang deal with in their van, right? It's not like whodunit. It's not like revealing secrets or finding clues to solve crimes or any of that. It's not finding unknown truths in any capacity, which is how we tend to use that word in English. It is Thaumasteria, the mysteries, are cultic religious practices. And religion back then, in ancient Greece, where the word comes from, was largely cultic, right? You had a lot of different gods, and you had a lot of different celebrations around those gods. Bacchanals being the most famous. You've got your god Bacchus, who's big into wine, so you go out in the woods, you get drunk, and you have an orgy. And that's a religious rite, and that's sort of what we associate with that. But there were a lot less debaucherous forms of these rites as well. Where the idea of secrecy comes in is if you weren't one of the initiated, you weren't invited, and you didn't know what happened, right? They're mysteries insofar as if you're not in the club that goes off into the woods, the things they do, you don't know about, right? It might be more closely equivalent now to things like what a fraternity might do as their initiation rites and things, right? They're secrets to the initiated, to those in the club. and they're rites or rituals that are observed and performed. It comes to mean secret because people not initiated don't know what these rites are, right, and aren't welcome. Um, so they have a connotation of secrecy from that, but the core idea is a religious practice or a rite, a sacrament. Um, the the Greek word mysterium is translated into Latin as sacramentum, which is of course the word that our word sacrament comes from. So this is a religious, air quotes, sort of, not as, this is a ritualistic, religious worship involved thing. And this woman is marked as such, right? This is, we talk about how people get caught up in pursuit of wealth and power and these things. We kind of separate that from any kind of religion, but you know, sometimes you do hear people associate that with its own kind of worship, right? And this is very much doing that, right? You end up serving, worshiping, you even have rites and rituals around power and money, and these things that corrupt. And it forms, when we talked about this beast, the text used an important number, right? The number 666, and dwelt on, and we talked about the idea that what that means is, in 6 days of creation, you've got all the world and all the human things. And what you don't have is this period of the seventh day to rest with and to join with God. And it's a rejection of God. The rites and ritual of this church are the religion of that rejection of God, right? They're reveling in and serving human things with a rejection, and earthly things with the rejection of God, right? The woman, as we first see her here, you know, the good one is depicted in heaven, right? And this one is just sort of on earth, on some water, because that's the best you can do without God, right? It's, everything is like these divine things would be without God. And it's a pale and empty mockery. But it maybe isn't trying to mock it, right? It maybe is striving to be like God and failing, right? It's an interesting question, but to what extent does the devil think he can replace God? We know he can't, but to what extent does he try to? I don't know, because, you know, when you deal with the father of lies, you're not going to get to the psychology behind what does the devil really intend to do very easily at all. Whether he portrays himself as able to replace God in our lives, which is certainly true, or whether he actually thinks he can, it's hard to know, and it doesn't matter. For our purposes, he sets up these earthly things, and through those lies, suggests that they're as good as God, right? But if you look at all, well, that woman is shining in brilliant splendor above the heavens themselves. And this one's a little soggy here sitting on the waters, right? Like, big difference. And that difference is the difference between God and people, right? We can't really be facsimile. There's no replacement for God, right? Like, in a lot of work environments, it's common to say everybody is replaceable, which is true, right? Like, even the most talented and valuable members of an organization, if the need arose, could ultimately be replaced in individual or in aggregate. People are unique, but in social function, everyone can be, you can make up for the absence of any one person with another or more people. And, it's all kind of the same thing because we're all people. The thing you can't really make up for is the absence of God. And that's what Satan has to try to do, right? If he's saying, hey, you don't need God in your life, he has to throw out these lies that say this is the same thing, right? Like, okay, yeah, you could worship this woman and you could worship as this woman does, and we don't worship the woman, but as she models in this church and hold up this great model of service and devotion to God that brings God forth into the world through what it does. Or, you could have this abomination and fornication and revelry, and it's just as good or better, right? It fills the same gap. It's better. Like, who needs divine bliss and perfect love and harmony for all eternity when you could have sex and wine and money? Those are better, right? And the problem is, a whole lot of people believe that. Throughout all of human history, the devil has made a very persuasive case to a lot of people that, living a good and holy life, that does sound lame. And it doesn't sound like something that I want to aspire to. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, absolutely. That sounds like the thing that I want to serve and to worship. There's a reason rock and roll got tied in with devil worship, and it's not because people playing rock music by and large serve the devil. It's because the lifestyle that is about often is one that manifests from people who have bought into the lie, right? It's not the only way though, right? Like, it revels in it. But politics, business, there are so many other areas where people are equally reveling in it, but a little less publicly and obnoxiously so. They get a pass, but shouldn't, right? So much of the society we know and live in today is serving the beast and these lies, and is a part of this church of the beast. So we talked a lot previously about the beast itself, but here we see some of how that manifests and what that church, those rites, that worship looks like. But remember, we're dwelling on this now because judgment is coming. This isn't here to stay. This is on its last legs. And finally here we're connecting the theme we've seen elsewhere. Not only is the thing being drunk abomination, but we also have the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs, a thing we've seen come around a few times as a part of what's involved. That is also a thing that seems sacramental. Remember, once all the good people were gone last time, in the previous chapter, we saw the rivers turned to blood in a way that was parallel to this. This is not a good thing, right? This isn't drinking the blood of Jesus in Holy Communion. This is, the implication is the blood is there because they're doing the killing. And it brings wrath and not, you drink Jesus' blood in the right disposition of mind and soul, and it can deliver you to eternal salvation. This is not that. This is, again, revelry and rejoicing in, you've taken these lives, right? You have the blood of these saints and martyrs because you killed them, right? And so you have and are rejoicing in the taking of those lives, but of course they're protected by Jesus. And so that becomes just a further manifestation of your evil and of trying to claim. It's another form of a perverted sacrifice. or sacrament without Christ, right? The good version. You drink the blood of a good and holy person who was sacrificed willingly for your behalf, and that leads you to live. But of course, we remember the death of Christ. We don't celebrate it so much, nor would we cause it. We commemorate it. This is saying, that's a holy thing. Here's some holy people. We'll just, kill them and drink their blood, and it's the same deal, right? And there's no God involved, right? Again, there's no God involved. It's what's the best we can do form of this Eucharistic life-giving thing without God. Well, let's find some holy people and kill them, and consume their life essence to feed on us, and for us to feed on and to become holy, right? But it's not even about becoming whole. It's just the total flipping on its head and perversion of this very sacred and holy and powerful thing. It's like evil is fundamentally here depicted as not creative. It's not making new things. It's just perverting things that God already made. It can't make a new thing. It just corrupts things that God made. Right? Like what some of the examples already used, like sex, good thing. But use it this way and it'd be even better, but definitely not. Or even, alcohol. For most people, having the occasional drink in a social setting can be a very positive and a good thing. If that much is good, and you don't need all those people around because they'll tell you you're drinking too much. And it's the alcohol and not the connection it forms with other people that really matters. And if a little is more, a lot is better. Or money or human production, right? Like we're meant to labor and to produce and for things and to be fruitful in a lot of different ways. And that is itself a good. But, if it's good to have enough, having a lot more would be so much better. And who cares if doing that means that not everybody else has enough? They shouldn't have been so poor. And then it would be fine. Like if they acted like you did and were willing to, rob and steal from people with less power or opportunity, they wouldn't be in that position. It's on them for being poor. And I'm getting mine, so who cares, right? Like all these things the things that the devil recommends as evil are things that God created and that God created good. The devil isn't making new things. He's perverting existing things and making them evil with lies. So all of this idea of church, this idea of sacrament, this idea of all these things that we're going over here are, let's take a truly powerful, profound, and good thing, take God out of it, try to misapply or use it, and to try to set that up as a thing that exists in place of God. And that is the worship, the culture in terms of religious practice, the mysteries of evil. Or you take good things, you remove God, and you apply them selfishly and destructively. And then you have a new thing that is, this is so fun, right? Isn't everybody having so much fun now? And of course, it's destroying everything and everyone it touches. So now, we start to explain these things. I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns, etc. We'll start with the beast. What is this beast? Not this one. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is to ascend from the bottomless pit. And then again later, marvel to behold the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. Twice in one verse we do that, because that is the core and essence of what this beast is. It's very like the Lamb, who was and is to come. With, one word difference. The Lamb was and is to come. The beast was and is not and is to come. Huge difference in one word. The things of evil are empty and without substance or reality to them, right? They're lies. When you follow and pursue that lie, you get to a point where you find that it was empty. But you said this was going to be fun. And so why don't I feel fulfilled? Oh, you just need to do more of it. Then you'll be satisfied. We chase these promises of evil, and we never find substance or satisfaction. Because, of course, the thing that truly is God has been removed from them. That's the first thing, the first part of the perversion of any of these good things is you remove God from them. And God, what is the name of God as he revealed it to Moses? I am who am, or who I am, depending on how you translate it. Either one's fine. God, by name, by identity, is reality itself, is being. That the devil cannot imitate. So, he can point back and say, look at all those fun evil things that happened. Wouldn't you like to do that? And point forward and say, if you keep doing these evil things, it's going to be so good. Because those things aren't here. Those things aren't real. Lies can distort them, right? It's easy to distort the past and the future. And you're never called to account for that. But in the right now, we're faced with the reality of the fact that those evil things we give into are empty and fruitless. And that is true as we're sinning and as we're pursuing those things, right? The idea of the past and the future keep us doing these things that are in the present empty. It was fun before when I did it, I think, and it surely will be again. It's not fun right now, but it will be, and it has been. Just got to do more. And so always the promise of evil lives in the past and in the future, because it can't deliver on it. In the present, it is always empty. And that is the substance of the beast, and that's part of what drives it so much to devour, is how can it ever be satisfied? When the present is always empty and always void and always unreal. That is the thing that will never, in the present, find satisfaction. And so it always seeks to expand, to grow, to devour, in the hopes that it might finally be enough, but it never will be. Whereas, when we live a life in God, what is the thing that Jesus says to everyone when he sees them? It's a super common thing. Peace be with you, right? That peace is not just an absence of conflict. That peace is the thing that all of this work of evil can never offer. It's satisfaction. It's contentment. It's joy. It's all the things. It's reality. Here, now, in the present. It's being. Christ offers to us something that none of these other things can ever provide. And you can have it now as well, right? Christianity isn't a thing where, and relationship with Christ is not a thing that you're doing for the future. It's not, when you're in that mindset that the things I'm doing are going to make later better, there's cause for hope, absolutely, in our eternal salvation and living with God. But even that becomes an eternal now, not a future. Anytime you're doing a thing now that is for a future that's better than now, that's some sort of that evil distortion, right? You should have a good relationship with Jesus Christ now, and you can, right? And if how you're trying to live a holier life is not one that involves being with Christ right now, then you're trying to do a good thing, and you're doing it in the way of the beast. You'll fall short of Christ, right? And you'll find your way to another one of these forms of worship that is serving evil instead of good. And it's one we do. It's one I see people do in the church. It's one I have certainly done. The only way to live with Christ is to turn your heart and your will to Christ in the present moment in time. Like what St. Augustine famously prayed, Lord, make me chaste, but not yet, right? That is the pathway to perdition. Obviously, St. Augustine figured that out. And he was he was a funny guy, right? It's well phrased, but obviously by the time he was there praying that, his mind was already going toward, I want to serve God. It's not an unhelpful thing that we sometimes have to improve by degrees. And he was still at least to a point where he got, I need to improve this, and I'm not quite ready to get there. I'm not condemning that. We're human. We have to, it's part of our journey, probably. But it's very important to realize that that's a bad place to be still on our journey. How often do people have the mindset of, I can do this and I can just go to confession? Anything that is accepting in the present time an attitude, a disposition, of behavior that's not oriented wholly on God is in some way, shape, or form buying into the lie. We don't serve God in the future. You can only serve God in the now. God is in the now. God is and is now. And evil is not. So now is the time that you can, free from the influence and lies of evil, be with God and God alone. If you're in the future, the devil's there, right? He was and is to come. He's in the past. He's in the future. He's not in the now. Now, you get to encounter God free from much of that influence and corruption of evil. If you just say, now is when I'm going to be with God, you can do that. And you can do that powerfully and with much less influence of corruption on what you're doing. But as soon as you put it off to the future, then that beast gets in there and says, yeah, you could. Example, going to confession. My local parish, my pastor is huge on that and says confessions every day because he thinks it's so important. It is available now. But because it's available now, it's available tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, the day after that. So I'll do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow, as I start to think about doing it tomorrow, there's that beastly voice getting in and lying and saying, if it's, you can do it the day after tomorrow because there's a really good show on tomorrow, or, a little tired, or stressful day, or any number of other things, and it's always just do it. That beast is right there with you in tomorrow, making a counterpoint to your point about God. But you know where he's not? Right now. If you just go right now, there's all of those voices about what else tomorrow could be aren't there, right? They're not. You can just do it, and you can just be with God, and you can do it right now. I've talked about it a lot through these videos, and I will more, but this makes the point really powerfully and profoundly that the only time that we can be with God is now. And we don't, right? Like, I don't, rarely. And I always set later aside for God. I have every intention of being a very good and holy person later. And now I have great level of comfort with not being. And I find that emptiness, that lack of satisfaction in those parts of my life where that's happening. Right? This is such a profound way of viewing the interplay between evil and good and suggesting a pathway to holiness for all of us. In these crazy images about a prostitute and a beast, we see a pathway to living a better life. And that's what all of this is, of course, about. So be with God in the now, or fight with the beast in the future and the past. One is going to lead somewhere and one isn't. Here, for a second time in the book of Revelation, we are urged that here is something that calls for a mind with wisdom. I think I understand the previous one pretty well. This one I have some ideas about. I will go over them. I'm less clear that my mind has the sufficient wisdom and understanding from God to totally get what's going on here. So rather than trying to explain it as though I perfectly understand this thing that I don't, I'm going to lay out, kind of the directions that my thoughts have gone in and some things that I think are pretty clearly wrong that come up as well. I don't have a perfect answer, so sorry about that, but we work as we're able, and sometimes things in the scriptures require that we sit with them for years in order for perfect understanding to come, or really solid understanding to come. So what have we got? We're breaking down this beast further. The seven heads are seven hills upon which the woman is seated. Then you've got seven kings and some things about those kings. Lots of sevens. Seven hills really seems to point to the city of Rome. It was very famously founded on seven hills. And we've had Babylon. It makes a lot of sense that you could be introducing Rome as well, right? We see these images collapse upon one another. I see no issue with the thing being both Rome and Babylon, because Rome, after all, was actively involved in the crucifixion. The other major time that a human empire won a victory over God. So seeing this beast as bearing a symbol of Rome as well as of Babylon, sure. So in these seven hills, there seems to be a connection with Rome like we had with Babylon. So there is probably a Rome aspect to this, but there's a lot that isn't as well, right? For example, some people read that and say Rome means the Roman Catholic Church. It means the Rome of Caesar Augustus who put to death Jesus Christ, right? It's meant to be a parallel to Babylon. The Roman Catholic Church is not a parallel to Babylon. It is the polar opposite of that. But some people see that. The other thing, because you have that allusion to Rome here in these hills, that people want to do is they want to make these seven kings that immediately follow Roman emperors, which is problematic. It's really problematic. Note that I just called them Roman emperor from the Latin word imperator, which they used instead of their word for king, rex, because Romans hated kings, going way, way back to the early days of the city of Rome. It was built when it was a city and not a nation. It was built into their identity as a people that kings are bad and they cannot and must not have kings. And so they didn't. And for a long time, not too long before Jesus, they were ruled as a republic, and they had this body of the Senate who for a very long time primarily directed people of Rome. And they could, in case of like military emergency, they could appoint a couple of people consul who had military authority temporarily vested by the state, because you needed, in that situation, one person calling the shots. But they usually appointed two of them, so you didn't have one still calling the shots. They were so reluctant to vest executive power in anyone. And then you had emerge, where this is not a Roman history class, but anyway, then you had emerge slowly over time a few of these people in military roles who were able to leverage that to gain more and more power. That's why Julius Caesar was assassinated. He was seen as gaining too much power, and they thought he was going to want to be king, probably correctly. And so they killed him, because that was a betrayal of the Roman identity. But then you had spring up shortly thereafter, in the wake of that, this idea of not a king, but an imperator, who came from that idea of military rule. And you had the triumvirate before that, where you had three people kind of co-equally ruling, and then eventually you had Caesar Augustus, who was the one. And from there you had these line of emperors, but they were very explicitly not kings. At that point, it was a semantic trick, of course, because they had sole executive power. They were like kings, but it was still very important. Caesar Augustus, for all that he did, had an easier time claiming to be a god than a king, because of the Roman identity and what it is, which is a crazy thing to think about, but not kings. So you have these 7 kings to suggest that those are Roman kings. Doesn't seem to work very well to me. The other side of that is, whereas a 7 in the book of Revelation meant these 7 things that I can point to, other than 7 churches that got letters, and even that is a little not just that. There aren't any others, because it's about the number and not about each of the things. So to say that these are these 7 rulers, any 7 rulers, Roman or not, is a big stretch. Saying they're Roman is preposterous. You could, somewhat compellingly, see these as major empires or kingdoms in the history of the world. The major powers: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece or Macedon. Finally, Rome as your half of the 6th one here, and something yet to come. And Rome, the one you're in the middle of. The numbers track. It kind of works. I find a few problems with that as I try to accept that idea. Ultimately, I think that's probably what it is. And I think it's probably how John saw it. And I think it's manifesting through what John knew of the world. My problem with it is twofold. One, it's incredibly Western-centric. There were whole empires and kingdoms in other parts of the world that dwarf even Rome, that don't get mentioned. And so from the point of view of God, we're leaving out, or even of global human history, we're leaving out very significant things in a very Western-centric view of what matters, which is certainly problematic, although it's the society that grew up around the people of God. So maybe that justifies focusing on it. Maybe. The second problem that I run into with it is Rome is like right there at the end, right? You've got, these have all mattered. We're in the middle of this 6th thing, which positions it to be especially godless, just from the numbers. And then, sure, okay, you have one more In the time since Rome, there have been many great powers still. Nothing maybe that we would quite put in that same conversation, but yeah, I mean, yes. There have been great empires since Rome. Not quite like Rome, but it has been. It seems it's been a long time since the fall of the kingdom of the empire of Rome. And there's been a lot that happens. This view seems to over preference the past in respect to the future, which is what a human would do, right? Like, you don't know what's coming in the future. You have some idea of what's happened in the past. This seems like John projecting to the best he can what this means based on what he knows of world history, which is fair insofar as I don't think that this is a vision that he has seen with his eyes so much as a vision that he's seen with his mind. As we talked about in the intro, prophecy is very much comes to be a thing that is relational, right? If it's like white light that contains all of these different manifestations of this truth about God, every human person is a prism, and we split off and create a color of a part of that light that shows up somewhere in the world. And John could very well be manifesting here his version of how this works in his relationship with what he understands to be true about God, and projecting it out onto history in a way that's correct, but not the whole picture. And to me, that seems like it's probably what's going on here, which makes this a little problematic in terms of what does it matter that these are the 7 hills mean Rome, or these are the 7 main empires of the world. Like, we're going backwards from the project of the rest of the book of Revelation, where we're working up to abstracts about God. And here we seem to be going backwards a little bit. So to avoid doing that, what's the important part of what's being said here, right? This beast has heads and horns that symbolize its power and reign on earth. The beast has power, influence, authority on earth that if you remember, it got and extends from the power of the dragon. On earth, Satan reigns. He has political power and authority, and the great nations of the world work in service of the beast, now being no exception to that. We talk about the United States of America being a Christian country, and it was sort of maybe founded that way, and it became a thing that matters, but it matters more in the rear view than it ever did in the present, I think. I think it's a history we impose more than one that existed, ever. And this, beyond that, it's simply not how God works in the world. God doesn't work through political power in the world. One of the two sides does that, and it's not God. So when you have a kingdom, any kingdom set up, if it talks about serving God and being a kingdom of God, and it's not the Roman Catholic Church on earth, it is lying. Period. It is a lie. And I hate to say that there's a lot about the nation in which we live that is great, and for which I am thankful. And the institution was a good on earth at one point in time, and its ability to spread democracy. I'm not anti-America in that regard, although much has also been done wrong. And that's where it's not good to hold it up as a thing of God. The United States of America is not protected from error as the Holy Catholic Church is protected from error. They're not the same thing. And if you were to give allegiance to one, it must be God's church, which is his kingdom on earth. The other, while it can do good, is also deeply fallible and incredibly flawed, even if it is doing good. And it does good out of the will of the people who make up this country, and their devotion to God separately leads to good being done politically, right? The reason our country can do good is because it functions, in theory, upon the will of the people. And if the people in the country are good, the country can manifest good. It's a beautiful institution in that regard, but it's not in and of itself good. It's good because the people are good. The church is in and of itself good. It makes people good, and in so doing can make the world good. The country can't. The church can. So our allegiance is primarily and first and foremost to the church, and every institution exercising political authority on the world is ultimately an instrument of the beast and not of God. And that's the higher truth and reality that we're getting to here. So moving on through this challenging interpretation. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven, and it goes to perdition. What does that mean? Again, this is the same thing we've seen, right? This is the attempt of Satan to mimic things of God, right? Throughout, from the first chapter of the book of Revelation, we've had 7 things in the presence of Christ who makes them an 8, who brings them to ultimate perfection. And it has been a constant theme throughout the book of Revelation. So if culminating in this 50th day and the sanctifying of all reality, through the addition of not just Jesus Christ, but God the Father himself into the reality of our world. Spoiler. The devil can't do that because he has no substance, no reality, but he tries. So all of this manifestation of these kingdoms and powers on earth, the devil tries to add himself to perfect, but it cannot, right? He tries to say, yeah, I'm the 8th thing to the 7 that is human rule on earth, and a repeating and never-ending cycle. And God says, yeah, no, you're just part of the 7, right? Like, this is flawed and imperfect, and it's like, it's that week that'll never come to an, it'll never stop being just, it never ends. It never gets to where it's meant to go. It's always empty. It can't be brought to the end to which it is meant to go. There is no end for human authority and power as we know it. It has no destiny. It has no place in a future and a perfect world. The devil tries to say this is the end all of things. This is it. And he tries to make it look like that's true. And God says, no, this is just a part of that cycle that is doomed to repeat and never to conclude. You're just a part of the 7. You're not, it's not the end all be all of things. So that's that one. So this form of this kingdom that is this 7-fold repeating thing without an 8, if it has no destiny, if it has no end, what else can happen to it, right? Here where we are and things are being judged and we are coming to that 50th day, we're coming to that end. There comes a point where you either are with God or you aren't. And that is where we're going here. So we'll slightly ahead of where we're at now, but that's what we're alluding to when we say it goes to perdition. And then we have some horns who are also kings. I think that further emphasizes the folly in trying to name 7 kings when you have the horns, and then you have 6 and you have only one who is to come, but then you have 10 others also. Like that doesn't work, right? It really breaks down if you try to name kings with any of these things. And while the first one kind of means rules, empires, potentially, in the abstract, the second one doesn't seem to. These 10 seem to be, insofar as they are 10 guys with political power existing in the world and serving uniformly the will of the beast. It seems to be 10 people in 10 different offices. And the point seems to be that they have been corrupted by the beast, and these 10 work together to serve the will of the beast. That's a thing potentially we can relate to in our world today. You have a lot of different kingdoms, countries in our world, but if all of these political institutions are corrupt, then are ultimately more a tool of evil than of good, then all of these nations jointly together can be serving the will of the beast. And everything we see going on and playing out still is a manifestation of that, which, I mean, I think history bears that out. Again, people can be good. These institutions, not so much. What is it? Was it Lord Acton who said, power corrupts absolutely? There's good in the world, and it's from individuals, and it's from people. And the more you have these sorts of, and it doesn't matter what type of government you have, the more you have these sorts of institutions that create power, these power structures, the more it just corrupts. But again, by contrast, well, the church is such an interesting thing in this regard because it's both. It has a human institution component of it that is unfortunately also corruptible and also subject to that. But it also exists as a divine entity in and of and for Christ that is protected from all of that. But there is a component of our church that is political, like all these other things, and is equally corruptible, unfortunately. Very, very unfortunately. But the church itself, through the working of the church, which is not political, it's sacramental, brings God into our world and creates holiness in our world. The other things that happen are so deeply regrettable and unfortunate. I don't know how we could run the church without politics being involved or money. It is a thing that exists in our world. But those things are not what the church is. The Church of Jesus Christ, as he built and established it, is built on, it's a sacramental thing, and it's built on divine grace. And that is the church that is a good thing in the world and guaranteed to be good. The institution that exists around that is still a very human thing and is subject to the same problems, unfortunately. But that just further emphasizes, if even the church as the human institution is so demonstrably corruptible, all human institutions are. But there is in the church that touch of the divine, that sharing with God. And the church in its true form is the Spirit of God living in each and every. The church isn't the institution. The church is the body of Christ. It's you and it's me. And it's all Christians sharing in the body and the Spirit of God together. And it's the sacraments that bring all those things together, bring Christ physically into our world. You know, as the as the devil tries to bring evil and non-being into the world through his lies, the church brings the physical presence of Jesus Christ into our world. And that's the church that is good and holy and incorruptible. And that's the thing we should serve and that deserves our devotion, right? The institution, it's a pass in a lot of ways because we know God works in and through it, but it is not, except in very limited aspects, infallible. And we probably have to keep that in mind too. But there is at its heart and its core and at its foundation something that is holy and incorruptibly good, Jesus Christ. And that, of course, is lacking in these exercises of the power of evil. And we see, moreover, that all of these kings, all of this authority, the beast is bringing to bear to make war on the Lamb, and that the Lamb is going to conquer. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And in that conquering, his chosen and faithful will end up pretty well. Note, it doesn't say we're going to war, right? As Christians, the beast is arraying kings and armies, and the Lamb is going to go to war. But we're not necessarily going with him. We're the battleground, right? You're not a soldier, you're the battleground. You have arrayed against you all the institutions, the lies, the deceit, the power of evil. And you have on the other side a lamb. And they are doing battle against you personally and everyone else. There's so much pressure, so much noise, so many evil tendrils reaching out to try to pull our attention away. But it's all without substance. And then there's the Lamb of God, who is who is all the things that all the rest of that promises and cannot be. And so the one God can more than stand against everything that the forces will see, because there's also an ultimate confrontation too, right? There's the individual personal battle, and then there's the ultimate confrontation in all of the world. And we'll see that one goes probably like you'd expect. The fate of the world is not in doubt. The fate of you is. The fate of me is. That's the thing, again, that as we read and think about this, that's the call here, and the urgency is we know how the world ends. We don't know how we individually end. It's not yet decided. You get to make that decision still every day. And as we talked about, you make that decision in the now, not in the future. If you try to make that decision in the future, you've made it, but you've made the wrong one. You have to make that decision ever in the now to be with God. And then your destiny is likewise assured. And now finally, we see one last interesting thing. So the waters that the harlot was seated on are the multitudes of the nations. That church, that debauchery, that evil thing sits over all of the nations of the world. I think that probably makes sense at this point. Whereas Jesus loves and honors his mother, the beast has a slightly different view toward his church. Slightly different. The beast hates the harlot. He will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. This is what happens when we serve evil, right? Like, we are stripped, desolated, and burned for it. The promise is, oh, this will be so great. And as we turn, Satan doesn't love us or like us. He hates us. He is seeking to win us to his side, not so we lovingly serve him, but to destroy us. So this manifestation of an institution that is devoted to and serving the devil is not a thing that he's going to love and uphold. It's, as everything else that he touches, it's a thing he's going to hate and destroy. Because that's all that he does, is he hates and he destroys and he burns. And so, again, that's the now of serving evil. And it's not what it promises. It's desolation, it's burning, it's emptiness, it's hate. And everybody involved does it to everybody else, right? In the church, we're about community, unity, love. Members of this community, of our community, uplift, uphold, and love one another, right? It's the second part of it. The first part is love God. The second part is love your neighbor. Well, the first part of the Church of Satan is the rejection of God, and with that comes the selfishness and serves only yourself, and hates and detests your neighbor, and uses, and desolates, and destroys, and burns, and hates. And so we see that even before God brings judgment and perdition, there is a tremendous amount of punishment, of pain that comes with serving the devil, which raises interesting reflections about the idea of hell. Why would God send me to hell and punish me with all of this burning and this fire and this hate? God doesn't make hell that way. People in it do. It's not God imposing that on you. It's God removing you and that toxicness from the world, putting you in a place with the devil and with others who share that attitude and that mindset. We make hell. God doesn't make hell. Hell is what we make when we reject God, and where we belong when we reject God. You see it try to manifest on earth, right? In the way we treat other people. We're people who are given in to worship of the beast attempt to manifest hell on earth in the way they're treating other people. And because the chickens haven't come home to roost yet, they think they're getting away with something, and they're not. And when they're left with nobody but people like them, it's awful. It's hell. It's torture. And of course, you take away any influence of good in the midst of that, or any possibility of repentance or ability to touch God, and there you have hell. It's not created by God. It's created by us, and it exists as removal from God and all that is good. But reflection here potentially helps us see some of how hell can be what we know it to be, and how God can still be God. So interesting thing to think about. Not where we want to be. The key point there is we should be not like that. And then things will go well for us. That's ultimately the point of this whole thing, right? The book of Revelation is not primarily written to tell us what the future is going to be. It's written to tell us what our present should be. And it uses what the future is going to be as a means of arguing for what our present should be. And of course, as we've said, by way of closing, the only time that you can make your present be what it should be is now, in the present. And that will shape your future, but you shape your future with God through what you do right now. This has been an overview of Lesson 18 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, the revelation of Jesus Christ, the faithful witness. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.